Hello and welcome to The Big Picture live on University Radio Nottingham. I'm Felix Hawes. Joining us today we have Sarah.
Hello.
Josh.
Hello.
And Daniel.
Hello.
So today we're going to be talking about COP26, a quick summing up of that, MP second jobs and Northern Ireland Protocol. It's the big Brexit debate. We've been longing for this. Okay, so first of all, COP26, the deal's been reached. Was it a success or was it a failure? What do you think?
I think that COP26 was a completely necessary event. We had to do something to try and reduce the impacts of climate change. However, it went nowhere near far enough. I mean, it's good that I think COP26 was the first COP agreement to mention fossil fuels, which is surprising but is a necessary step. However, it just didn't go far enough. It wasn't a sufficient agreement.
So what would have been far enough for you then, Sarah?
Well, I think pledges to keep the increase in temperature below or to 1.5 degrees is a good aim, but it's not realistic. We're on track for between 1.8 and 2.4 degrees. We need more substantial pledges to help reduce this.
Fair enough. I mean, it's a very confusing thing. But I mean, come on, there were some good things about it, right? I mean, some of the pledges to try and stop the deforestation of rainforests right at the beginning seem like, wow, you've actually done something good there. I mean, I don't know how they're going to police it. That's my worry.
But I think you'll find that the Environment Minister of Indonesia went back on the deforestation pledges, calling them clearly inappropriate and unfair.
Yeah, but come on, this is Indonesia, not Brazil, where the main hunkum is happening.
Indonesia has the world's third biggest rainforest.
Okay, I didn't know that.
So it is a fairly significant nation involving rainforest.
Okay, fair enough.
Daniel, do you believe that India and China were the cause of the deal to be less than what the UK was hoping for?
I mean, that's one way to put it. I mean, everyone in the whole world saw that there was huge hypocrisy by everyone who was there. I mean, you've got all these private jets turning up to Scotland when these big government leaders have been forcing everyone to do things online for the past couple of years. I mean, what was particularly incredulous about this hypocrisy was that the menus that they used at COP26 were described as like serving cigarettes at a lung cancer conference. And then, as a second point, yes, you got this whole China things. The deal didn't really seem to achieve anything to me. But it's also occurred at the same time where we're beginning to see that environmentalist policies are really damaging the economy. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but my rent is going up by £400 next year. And a big reason for that is because we're adopting these environmental policies that are affecting our economy.
Daniel, then, if you think that it's costing too much money, what do you think we should do? Is it just something that we should...
Sure.
Is it worth that amount of money that we are spending?
Look, in general, and this isn't getting into the specifics, but I think they're taking the wrong approach. The approach of COP is to say, right, we cannot actually deal with any increase in CO2 emissions. I think the better approach is to say, right, we can deal with some CO2 emissions, right? We've got a lot of these predictions wrong in the past, but it's right to try and lower it. The better thing to do is to have an economic approach where we say, why don't we spend a reasonable amount of money on, I don't know, sea defences, right, to protect the country, instead of spending absolute tons of money failing to prevent climate change in the first place. To me, that seems like the more sensible approach, or at least have a more blended approach towards that.
That's a very isolationist perspective. That's preserving the UK when we've actually admitted all this carbon dioxide over our history throughout the Industrial Revolution and leaving third nations to suffer. One of the big problems with COP, I'll admit, is that we didn't do anything really for reparations for these smaller nations, particularly island nations, which 1.5 is literally life or death for those islands. They won't survive a sea rise.
Do you think it's not looking good for the government that the fact that they're calling for richer nations to fund the environment defences for poorer countries when they've cut the foreign aid budget from 0.7% to 0.5%?
Yeah, I think it's completely, it's outrageous. The government claims they're just so contradictory. If we're serious about trying to reduce the effects of climate change, we need to be investing in other countries. We've got a lot of offshore manufacturing that we need to address, and by investing in other nations, it would help offset these issues. So I think we need to increase that budget.
Honestly, I don't think I could agree more. I mean, the cutting of the foreign aid budget was the first time that this allegedly conservative government actually cut something. I mean, can you believe it? It's as if they should be fiscally responsible. And the foreign aid budget, we know, is something that has been incredibly misspent over the past 10 years. I mean, we've had money going to the Ethiopian Spice Girls, countries with space rocket programs. I mean, there's better ways to do it than spending it on the foreign aid budget, in my opinion, which is just a bit of a farce. And on the reparations approach, I mean, come on, can't you just see this foreign aid budget as an example of reparations, modern day reparations?
I would challenge you strongly on the misuse of our foreign aid budget. Sure, some money goes awry, but it does genuinely help people in these poorer nations. And that's why you saw philanthropists across the world coming in to make up the shortfalls, because our spending does genuinely have a real consequence.
Do you think that do you believe that the actions of groups like Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain are necessary for the government's not doing enough? Or do you think that the tactics that they use are, at worst, trying to, engaging in terrorism, and at best putting people off a cause that they might otherwise agree with?
I think the idea of calling these groups terrorist groups is absolutely outrageous and farcical. To be honest, I'm surprised that these demonstrators haven't gone further in their action, considering what a crisis that we're currently in. Not that I don't openly support groups like Extinction Rebellion, because I think they have wrong tactics. For example, they like glue themselves to trains when that's working class people trying to use public transport. I think that's the wrong tactic to use. But I am surprised that these demonstrations haven't gone further.
Well, how could they go further? What do you recommend they do to go further?
Well, I think that, to be honest, that I'm surprised that people aren't blocking huge roads across the country. Like that, it's not a mass movement yet, and it should realistically be a mass movement, considering the absolute crisis that we're in at the moment. People
are dramatically underreacting. Yeah.
No, people are dramatically overreacting. It's honestly, it's not a major crisis, blown out of proportion. Basically, everyone wants to look like a hero and be like, I'm saving the planet, when it's less of a major problem than people think. Look, on this Insulate Britain thing, right? One of their key things is to say every house in the UK should have a green heat boiler. I mean, that costs £10,000. How are we meant to afford that? What Insulate Britain do is basically say, here's a major problem, let's just throw it onto the government and hope they solve it, without actually having a reasonable method of doing that.
I think that you're taking quite a Western view of this crisis. It is
a logical
crisis,
view,
a Western view. As has been mentioned, the real impacts of climate change won't be felt here immediately. So I think estimates currently range from 1.8 degrees to 2.4 degrees increase if we're going at our current rate. This maybe wouldn't have a huge impact in this country, but it would have massive impacts elsewhere. So I think that we need to refocus our minds and stop being so isolationist. And
yeah,
selfish.
I mean, look, we know less and less people are dying from natural disasters. We know more people die from the cold every year and all these sort of things, mainly due to the spread of capitalism across the world. So in my opinion, you have a strong economy, right? You can deal with some environmental damages. I'm not saying purposely go and pollute the world or something, gigantically stupid like that, but you get the picture. Let's have a more balanced approach to this, right? Rather than saying crisis, nothing we can do about it, better stop all air travel and be massive hypocrites and stuff like this. Be more logical on this, right?
So you're saying that we can afford it, so it's fine for us, but other countries can't afford it, so basically it's up to them to fund it?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I don't think it's going to make a massive difference to poorer countries anyway. It's kind of exaggerated. Any natural disaster that we see, it's basically like, well, that's climate change. Well,
because it is.
Well,
because that's what
it's not.
scientists have been saying
Well,
for 30 years.
say the Australian. Well, actually, before that, it was predicted that the world was getting colder, and scientists were completely wrong about that. And
Because
with these
science
predictions,
changes.
it does change.
Changes
It
over
does
time
change.
constantly. Our understanding is always getting better.
I agree. But I mean, you have to put a line in the sand. Say, they have got it wrong. That doesn't mean they're necessarily wrong about this. And it also, they're not so conclusive of how much it is due to humans. I'm not saying there's no presence of humans in the first place, but I think we're putting all our balls in one pram and pushing the other options away, basically.
So do you think, Daniel, that the government is actually going too far in tackling climate change, whilst Josh and Sarah would think they haven't been doing enough?
Far too far. I mean, the government's basically controlled by Carrie Simmons, and Boris Johnson has lost his conservatism. So it's just a bit of a farce. Name me one conservative thing about Boris Johnson if you think I'm wrong about that.
I don't think that you can say that Boris Johnson is lacking conservatism.
What's the most
Definitely
conservative thing he's
not.
done?
I mean, we'll be moving on to the MP's second jobs in a bit, and I think that will demonstrate the pure conservatism that Boris Johnson is showing. At the
That's a
moment.
minor issue.
It's not
I
a
mean,
minor issue. It
affects a tiny proportion of MPs. I mean, the
We'll
fact
get
can you
onto
give
this.
any other
We
examples?
will get on to that. Just to conclude this segment, because we talked about COP26 several weeks now. Out of 10, if you can put a number on it, how successful do you think COP26 has been? We'll start with Sarah.
So I'm going to have to kind of moderate this. So out of what I expected to come out of COP26, I would probably say about a 7 out of 10. But realistically, what is needed, I would say a 1. Although my expectations going into COP26 were extremely low, it's nowhere near good enough. But I do appreciate that some change has been made.
I'd
Josh?
say 5. Like, some really good side agreements were made, and some progress which you might not have heard about too much on the news. But overall, the big takeaway, the commitment went from it's going to be phased out entirely to just phased down. I just don't think it goes far enough.
And Daniel?
I'll give it a 3, Felix. I mean, it wasn't a total disaster as I expected, but they weren't complete idiots, but they still haven't addressed how we're going to afford it. My rent's going up from it. I don't think any of those points were addressed.
How's
either,
your rent
so.
going up for it? Sorry, can we? What
Sure,
about the
sure.
climate crisis?
Look.
is leading to your rent
The
going up?
government has intervened in the economy to help environmental policies, right? So the government over the last 15 years has been incentivising building wind power, for example, and so wind power in 2020 made up 25% of our energy production. I mean, fair enough, right? You've got 25% of your energy from a green source. Fantastic, right? But what the government essentially did there by intervening in the free market is made everyone say, right, all your energy is now coming from an unreliable source. We're reliant on an unreliable source.
Fossil
in September
fuels are
of
running
this
out,
year,
right?
in September of this, well, they've been seeming to last longer than everyone's expectations. I mean, they're meant to run out in 1992 under the first predictions. But look, in September of this year, to finish my point, right, wind power made up 7% of our energy production. And so we suddenly found energy prices going massively up, which is, of course, the main reason why inflation's going up. Because if energy prices are going up, everything you have, I mean, everything I'm seeing in this entire room, except perhaps our bodies themselves, are from energy. So everything goes up, which is why inflation's going up to 4 or 5%, which is the highest it's been in about 15 years.
Green solutions will only get cheaper if investment is put into them, and if we continue to move down that path. But what's the other point I was going to make?
Look, I agree. I understand why they're building wind farms. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just saying you've got to accept that's going to change the economy, and
We're
has.
Also not reliant now on nations like Saudi Arabia, for not as reliant for our power, for oil, etc.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying don't build any wind farms. I'm just saying accept it's going to cause problems when you destroy all the coal plants and you can't be reliant on them, right? it's gonna cause inflation, and it hasn't caused inflation. It's not entirely due to wind. There are other things going on at the same time, but wind power was a reason for that, and for some reason, no one is recognising this. I don't know why.
Well, very interesting discussions there. As always, good debate on the big picture. So, with climate change occurring, perhaps life's going to get a little bit hotter. So, here's Relight My Fire by Take That. Hello and welcome back. I just, first of all, would like to apologise. I think there were some technical issues with one of our microphones in the last section. So, I do apologise if you couldn't hear some of the things that were said. Okay, we're going to move on to our second topic then of today, which is on second jobs for MPs. This has all come about after the Owen Paterson scandal, and there have been more investigations into jobs that people were doing. A particular focus has been on Sir Geoffrey Cox. Keir Starmer has suggested banning certain second jobs, keeping jobs like working in hospitals, Army Reserve, police. Boris Johnson, just before Keir Starmer did his news conference, announced the exact same thing. But there seems to be mixed messaging from the government, because Anna-Marie Trevelyan, who's, I believe, the International Trade Secretary, was saying how many hours a week would be suitable. She said 15 hours a week, which is actually less than what Sir Geoffrey Cox is currently doing, so he could get away with pocketing even more money than he currently is. So, to the panel, is this government corrupt? Is there too much sleaze going on? And what would you do about second jobs?
I think if we look at the statistics of Conservative MPs with second jobs, 90 Conservative MPs out of 360 have second jobs, compared to 5 Labour MPs of 199. I think that just shows the amount of sleaze and money, second job money that's going to Conservative MPs. So yes, I do think this government's corrupt. However, I don't know how it's a challenge to regulate it, because I think, as Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson have both laid out, that there could be restrictions on what job you could have, but how would that be decided, and who would decide if your job would qualify for this or not? I think also the government disagreement on the amount of hours is quite amusing as well, because we've heard 10 hours, we've had 15 hours, we've had 20 hours.
All from the same person, if I may interrupt as well.
So I think perhaps a cap on the amount of money, I think that's the only way to kind of establish how much time you can spend on your second job.
Well, hold on here, because you said that was evidence of corruption. Having a second job does not necessarily mean corruption. Sure, you can have a second job and you might actually prioritise working for a bank over your constituents, and that is corrupt, right? If you're using that to aid the company, right? But that's not necessarily happening. If you've got a second job where you write a column for a newspaper, that isn't corruption. That isn't corruption. Just having a second job. You've made a jump there, is what I'm saying.
Second jobs certainly imply conflict of interest, I would argue. Like, if we look through some of the companies people are working for, or Julian Smith advising on energy and renewable fuels, satellite companies, there's just lots of things where they would have the power to exert influence over government and potentially hand out contracts. And as we know from COVID, contracts can be given out very easily without much scrutiny.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. What would you say then about Keir Starmer receiving £113,975 in legal advice before he was leader of the opposition? What would you say about that? Would that be acceptable?
I don't know.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It's not acceptable. I think the crucial thing that we're missing here is that being an MP is a full-time job. And that's what you should be focusing on. And as an MP, you have been elected by your constituents to serve them, and that should be your primary focus. You shouldn't be accepting extra money from different organisations. And I think Keir Starmer, I think that he needs to accept that he has also accepted money through a second job.
So no second jobs then?
I have a proposal.
No second jobs at all?
No, I have a proposal which I think goes further than both the Conservatives and Labour suggestions. At the minute, what our problem with second jobs is it's sort of assumed that what's happening is going to be acceptable, right? They go in, they declare it, and then it's only later on that they get in trouble. Oh, surely what would make more sense is, rather than a reactionary policy, to proactively at the start of each parliamentary session to review secondary jobs and work out which should be deemed conflicts of interest and which shouldn't.
But who would establish that? I mean,
That is the problem.
That's the crucial problem.
Okay, but on the whole, almost all of them are conflicts of interest. The only ones which seem to
That's
me
not the case.
personally to make sense are like working on the NHS and beside businesses and industries which will really help inform parliamentary debate.
What about trade unions? The influence of the trade unions. Many Labour MPs are funded by trade unions. Do you think that should be looked into because they could be lobbying for interests of those organisations?
Sure, it can't hurt to be transparent.
I think that the link between the Labour Party and trade unions is obvious and is long-lasting. I do think that it needs to be looked into, but crucially, I don't think you can separate the Labour Party and the power of the trade unions. So I think that comparing trade union involvement to a private company involvement is completely ridiculous.
Look, I mean, put it this way, right, from my perspective here, everyone in this room believes that MPs can have second jobs. Everyone believes that. Otherwise, why would you believe that MPs can become ministers? Right, so
Well, this is
clearly
an interesting point,
MPs
yeah.
can actually deal with having a second job. But as soon as you say, oh, MPs can become ministers, you're basically saying, right, there are some jobs that MPs can do if they're helping exert the government power. But if you're working with a private company to limit the government power, you're basically entering yourself into an impossible debate here. I mean, Josh, you made some really good points, right? If you're a doctor or a nurse, you have to practice this to keep your qualifications. Guess what? If I was a doctor, I'd want to occasionally practice it while being an MP to maintain my qualifications. What if you're an army reservist? The best example that I found was a Labour MP called Khalid Mahmood, who at one point was the only Muslim MP in Parliament, who works part-time for the Policy Exchange to create good policies to stop Islamist extremism. I mean, who's going to stop this? And the thing is, as soon as you get to this, it's really difficult to draw a line. You know, what about MPs getting paid to do speeches? Like Theresa May, you got paid £80,000 to do a speech. It for 3 hours. It's very difficult to stop these things. And then you start coming into, what about slightly advising private companies who could really actually do with having someone with inside information into Parliament?
They could.
Yeah, well, it's very useful, and it's like, you know, in some cases it helps parliamentary debate. In my opinion, right? I mean, the current laws could be reformed, but you know, when you've got laws that say, right, you cannot use this, your parliamentary privileges in Westminster to help anyone you're being paid by, you know, the rules are there, and in general they work.
That's why I mentioned the idea of maybe looking at how much an MP is paid for each hour and how much they earn through their second job. I mean, your example of Theresa May getting paid, was it £80,000
For 3 hours.
For 3 hours is completely outrageous.
What, would you ban that?
Well, it would need to be reformed and looked into. You can't expect an MP who should be representing their constituents, if they get paid £80,000 for 3 hours. That's just that's a crazy amount of money.
But what's wrong with it in the first place? I mean, she gave a speech. I believe it was J.P. Morgan, and you know, in her spare. I mean, you don't have spare time when you're allowed to do these things and get paid for it. I mean, where would you draw the line on this? Would you say, right, £25,000 for a speech? You know what? That's the limit. Some people would say that's crazy. You got to, you know. In which case, people are going to get less good speeches from our top politicians, and they're going to be less well known across the land.
I think it's very interesting, and it's also important to note that there is a difference between government and parliament. In government, you can't do second jobs, whilst you can in parliament. But I think we've basically highlighted one of the issues here is that we all disagree, and so there needs to be some sort of cross-party agreement on what is acceptable and what isn't. But Daniel, you did raise a very good point about people in government are being ministers and are being constituency representatives. So when Boris Johnson was asked about Sir Geoffrey Cox, the fact that he's living somewhere in the Caribbean and he can't represent his constituents back here, he was saying, well, the priority should be to represent the constituents. But then I put to Boris Johnson, is he primarily focusing on his constituents, or is he running the country more? So is there something that we should be doing to reform the system, or on a separate note to the second jobs, on should MPs represent constituencies? Because if you're in government, you can't be representing the problems of your constituency as much as the Department for the Environment or the Treasury, because you've got that's perhaps a larger job that's going to be on your mind on a day-to-day basis. Does that need to be reformed, do you think?
Look, as far as I see, it's a necessary evil. There's nothing you can do about it. Ministers have to come from MPs, and I really like the parliamentary system working like that. Fact is, Boris Johnson will hire I don't know how many people to do his constituency work for him, and that's one way of getting around it. It's not as good as having your actual MP being the one who responds to the letters, but when you are Prime Minister, I'm afraid to say that's one of the L's of our parliamentary system.
I'm of the opinion the system could do with some revision. Like, for years, my MP used to be John Bercow, the former Speaker of the House, and I don't believe he was able to conduct his constituency role and the Speaker to the best of his ability, right? But he was having to divide his time. So I do think some reforms would be beneficial.
He wasn't elected either. As soon as you become a speaker,
he was elected, but he was elected on a platform with no real opposition.
Yeah. I agree that should have reform with speakers.
Believe it or not, I agree with Daniel for once. I think that it's necessary for ministers to come from a pool of MPs, because crucially they are elected. If it's by their constituents, and it's not by the country, but it is by their constituents. They are elected individuals, and the argument about the speaker is a valid one. But I think it is crucial that a speaker is also is also democratically elected. And although they don't stand for election during their term as speaker, I think that's also necessary, because you could remove a speaker for political purposes. So I think that Daniel is right on this occasion.
Which, during another point
Excellent.
that we haven't touched upon with these MP second jobs is how do you get the best MPs in the first place, and how are you meant to decide who the best MPs are? And one approach to this, particularly for the Conservatives, but it would be for any party, I believe, is to say, how well are you doing in your field before you're entering politics? Right? And so if you are an incredibly successful businessman, clearly you're doing something good. You're good at making tough decisions, you're very hardworking, etc., right? It's a reasonable way of judging these things if you're successful before you become an MP. If you totally ban second jobs, then you're saying to someone, who's on an election platform or potentially going to be a really good MP, right, that's it, you're going to have to totally cut yourself off from the previous world. I don't think there's wrong with having a little bit of connection to your previous world. I
think that's completely ridiculous. The idea that you have to be successful to be in your prior career before being an MP. Who would determine who's successful? And also things like businessmen, you can have an extreme, in our capitalist system, some people have extreme leg ups, whereas other people don't. So
why do you think we have so many career politicians then? And why are our politicians so bad? It's because not enough people are running for parliament, and I'm saying this is one thing that's going to hinder that.
Do you think we should have an age limit? Because you've got some cases of people that are coming straight from university without any experience of the real world, and you've also got a case of fewer working class politicians now than you used to. Everything else, the parliament's more diverse than ever, which is a good thing, because obviously you need to have every person represented in parliament. But in terms of working class, there is a huge decline. You don't have these people that have worked in trade unions before moving into parliament as much as you used to. People that have worked in manufacturing and agriculture. This is declining massively as well.
I think the idea of putting an age cap on MPs is completely absurd. I think young people already not represented enough. So putting an age cap on that would make that even worse.
Well, very interesting discussions there. We're going to take another break now, and it's going to be Dolly Parton working 9 till 5. Welcome back. Well, it is now the big one. We've been waiting for this one for a few weeks. We're going to be talking about Northern Ireland Protocol. I'm sure we'll be getting into other elements of Brexit. So, Northern Ireland Protocol was part of the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson negotiated. Seems like ages ago now, but it's still going on. It's one of the many things being discussed, and should it be reformed? So I'm going to ask to the panel, for the Europhiles amongst you, those that are more inclined to back the European Union, is it right that part of the United Kingdom is being governed by a foreign body that they aren't electing? And to the Eurosceptics among you, is this, the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol, simply unavoidable? Because as soon as you leave the European Union, there's going to be problems with the Northern Ireland border to maintain the peace there between Northern Ireland and Ireland. What do we think of the Northern Ireland Protocol?
So, firstly, Felix, I'm probably the most pro-Europhile on this panel. Well, I don't think that the Northern Ireland Protocol and the ECJ oversight is compatible with the very notion of Brexit. But I don't think there's any way you could get around that, and I think this is an inherent flaw in Brexit since the start. Right, so if we look at what's been happening, Lord Frost issued a command paper a couple of weeks ago saying he wanted to make changes, and he drew a red line under the ECJ oversight and said this shouldn't happen, even though he technically signed the treaty like a couple of months ago saying exactly that, and that they should have oversight. And there's no way to get around it. A couple of years ago we would have said no legitimate government would ever consider carving up their own customs territory. And that's essentially what the government did. They put a border between Northern Ireland Sea and the UK. It's just bonkers.
I'm not the biggest fan of the European Union out there, but I think that it was a crucial oversight in the referendum that this wasn't considered. I don't think. I think that there was a lot of talk in this referendum, and there was a lot of missing key points. And I think that the government, being one of the only governments to proceed with the plan, that they had no idea what it was going to look like, just demonstrates how potentially flawed the Northern Ireland Protocol could be. And it is flawed, but I think that it's crucial to maintain good relations between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So I think it's a necessary protocol.
Yeah, I mean, it appears as if today, Felix, I'm taking the sad position of the Eurosceptic amongst the group, the happy Eurosceptic. Look, the Northern Ireland Protocol is this deeply confusing thing. I mean, it appears to be a bit like fudge pudding, is the way I'd view it. I mean, look, I wonder if there's anyone listening to this who would have legitimately been able to give you a definition of the Northern Irish Protocol as soon as I gave it. I was very confused by it. And look, I agree. I'm a keen unionist. I think people in England don't care about Northern Ireland enough as a people group who actually want to stay in the United Kingdom, and so we should totally respect that.
Agreed.
And the Northern Ireland Protocol is a serious problem for that. We have got Brexit for mainland Britain, and Northern Ireland is still lagging behind because they are part of the single market. Am I right, Josh?
Yes, you are right.
That's
Essentially what it does.
But you know, let's look at what Frost said here. I think you have to say, look, Boris Johnson was dealt a really difficult hand, right, when he became Prime Minister, because you had May, who wasn't a real Brexiteer beforehand, and he came in and he got a deal, and full credit for that. You might not think it's a very good deal. It was a deal, and the easiest thing to fall on was Northern Ireland. But here, if I read what someone else wrote in an article about what Frost and the government wants to do, and they said, right, we want to get rid of ECJ oversight on customs, and they recommended using the Swiss model for achieving this, right? And the Swiss model is having an arbitration panel overrule it, and then I haven't heard of any issues of that in Switzerland, so I think that's a reasonable change to make to maintain the unity of the United Kingdom.
It's not absurd, the idea of a Swiss arbitration panel. However, right, we are talking about a deal which just last year Lord Frost was describing as great, and now in his command paper he wrote is causing serious economic and societal difficulties. Like, that's quite a sudden change. And also, if we look at DUP MP Ian Paisley, he said that Boris Johnson told him he never intended on sticking with the protocol in the first place and planned on tearing up the bits he didn't like. And of course, we've had confirmation of this from Dominic Cummings, who essentially said something very similar. Now, this has led, understandably, to outrage across the international community. Leo Varadkar said, and I quote, "Those comments are very alarming, because that would indicate that this is a government and administration that acted in bad faith, and that message needs to be heard around the world. You shouldn't make any agreements with them until such a time as you're confident that they're going to keep their promises and honour things. For example, like the protocol. If this Brexit government intended to do Brexit seriously and to do it well, which I don't think was possible to begin with, but that's a separate issue, they ought to have spent the past 3 years building trust among the international community, and instead they're reneging on treaties they've just signed.
Josh,
it's one minor part of the treaty, right, to begin with, and they had barely any time to deal with it. I mean, look, I don't think it's great from Boris Johnson, right? I don't think it's great. It was the worst part of the Brexit deal in the first place. But, it's causing problems. Why not alter it? Yeah,
I think the plinth upon which he made his election campaign.
He lied to the DUP and the Northern Irish people. I agree. But, if you're admitting there's problems with it, fine. Terrible in the UK government. What is wrong with trying to change it now? And the EU took ages to come back to the UK government on the possible changes to help the Northern Ireland situation. They don't seem to care about it. They just seem to punish the UK here.
To be honest, Daniel, I've got limited sympathies for Boris Johnson. I think that as one of the main instigators of the referendum, I don't think you can say that, oh, poor Boris Johnson, he was stepping into the shoes of Theresa May. It was his fault in the first place, I would argue. And his ideological rush to kind of get Brexit done has caused this problem. So I think that Boris Johnson is I don't feel sorry for him. Let's say.
Well, I think it was reasonable to expect the rush because we'd been in limbo land for 4 years.
But except for the fact that Remainers were basically campaigning on the notion that Boris Johnson was lying and was saying this is going to get Brexit done, but Brexit will never be done. It's ongoing negotiations.
Well, it's been mostly done, and there's a mishap in Northern Ireland. Look, I won't. Well, look, I won't deny to you that the Brexit deal was perfect, but you're making too big of a hash of this. What is specifically wrong with saying, okay, can we re-look back at this? It's causing problems.
And break international law. That's not good.
Article 16 says if you're causing societal, environmental, or economic damage, you can re-look at this. Why not?
I think it's important also to note regarding international law that, and with Article 16, that the European Union are the only ones so far that have activated Article 16 over the vaccines. It's also important to note that France has broken international law by seizing British vessels, and many other countries in the European Union have broken EU law. Czechia, Italy, Poland, Portugal and Spain, France, Finland and Greece have all failed to add taxation for travel agents. Sweden has broken EU law on distance marketing of consumer financial services. Greece has failed to protect one of their lakes. Germany and France have broken EU deficit rules years and years and running. So it's a regular thing for countries to break international law. But it is still the case, of course, to note that the UK making deals in bad faith is not going to help us in the future. And also, Daniel, did Boris Johnson sell Northern Ireland down the river? Because you criticised Theresa May's deal, but Theresa May's deal did keep the union together. In fact, that was one of the main reasons why she went with that deal, because she was offered Boris Johnson's deal before, which he claims that they made, but actually it had been previously negotiated and rejected by Theresa May because of the threat of the union. So did he just sell Northern Ireland down the river?
I mean, look, it appears that way. I don't know what goes on in the inner workings of Boris Johnson's head. I mean, I wonder if he does himself sometimes. But yeah, no, he made an error on Northern Ireland. To be fair, you raised the point even better than I could, that the European Union does regularly break its own rules, and that's a really good way of looking at it. If the European Union breaks its own rules, what's particularly wrong with the UK doing it, and then saying, can we revise this treaty here?
I don't think because another nation or the EU breaks laws, you shouldn't. It's not fine for us to break laws as well. I'm afraid that's not how it works. But I think it's ironic that that the Labour Party is regarded as an England-centric party when Boris Johnson has kind of sold Northern Ireland down the river, and I think it was to protect the Red Wall, or the former Red Wall. It was to kind of stand up to Brussels again and just try and keep the votes that he gained in the last election. So I think that he's betraying Northern Ireland in exchange to stay in power.
Sacrificing part of the party name as well, the Conservative and Unionist Party. Sarah, you mentioned Labour. Keir Starmer has accepted that Brexit is happening. Interestingly, he was one of the key architects to try and persuade Jeremy Corbyn to go towards a second referendum, even though Corbyn, if we believe what's being reported, wasn't a massive fan of that idea. He's saying Brexit is done. It's now about how we make a success of Brexit. It's about mismanagement of Brexit. That's what he's saying it's about. But 98% of Labour Party members still want a close relationship with the European Union. Is it right for Labour to accept Brexit? Or should they try and persuade Britain to go back into the European Union in the future? Because that is still the belief of many people of this country. It's a minority. Polling has indicated that people have now begun to slowly accept Brexit. I believe in a recent poll had 56% said that they would stick with leave. But there's still a sizable people that want to rejoin. And of course, if Keir Starmer's a man of principle, perhaps you don't think he is, then he should stick to his beliefs that the European Union is a good institution, that Britain should be part of it.
I think on this issue, I would align with Jeremy Corbyn, because I agree that the European Union has its issues. It's fundamentally quite undemocratic, and the economic aspects of it I'm not overly keen about as well. But I think that it is important to maintain. It is an important institution for maintaining peace in Europe. However, I don't think as potentially corrupt as the referendum was, I don't think you can go back on democracy, because I think if you start going back on democracy, then it undermines the entire idea of our party system. So I think a second referendum was fundamentally wrong. So I think that we should continue to stay out of the European Union, as much as it pains me. But I think that we do need to maintain a close relationship with the European Union.
This wasn't it, Sarah? Right, one of the very rare things that the Communist Party got right for years and years. Right, the Communist Party has wanted to leave the European Union since we joined it in the first place, because they rightly recognised that it's an incredibly elitist, corrupt capitalist bloc. Essentially,
it is essentially, yes, but it has also got some good elements, undeniably. It's been crucial in maintaining peace and cooperation in Europe. However, I do think that the elements of it are definitely elitist and corrupt.
I would argue I'd take umbrage at the word undemocratic to describe the EU, right? The European Union used the D'Hondt electoral system to elect MEPs, which is far fairer than the electoral system we use here in the UK. I don't think you can criticise the EU when we're not criticising our own government.
But then the European Parliament can't put up legislature. They only rubber stamp what the Commission decides, and the Commission isn't elected, and the Commission can just appoint each other. So the Commission's never going to...
The Commission won't propose anything which they don't think will go through the European Parliament, so it does get the consent of all nations. Right.
That is true, but also if we want the European Union to be reformed, because we've got to accept there is a lot of Euroscepticism across Europe, and we were told recently by an MP, a former MP that I won't name, just for their own privacy, that there are rumbles that there's worries that France might want to leave European Union, so there is problems. And do you think then the European Commission, because they only appoint each other, they're only going to appoint people that are very Europhilic, that they won't ever be able to reform the European Union in a way?
No, because they'll adapt to survive, as all political parties do.
Do you think the European Union has... How has the European Union...
Good point.
How has the European Union responded to Brexit then in dealing with claims, challenges of sovereignty, immigration, or everything that Brexit occurred for?
What you're asking.
How has the European Union responded to Brexit in terms of trying to keep itself together with other nations?
I think the UK's leaving is enough of a case study to put anyone off from doing it for a very long time.
But opinion polling doesn't seem to indicate across Europe that it has really made too much of an impact. In fact, in Germany, the German National Bank, I believe it's called, has praised Brexit and has shown that that's a success that could happen from leaving the European Union.
The German National Bank said what?
Yeah, if that's what it's called, they said that looking at Brexit, that's a way of seeing success. There are rumbles in the European Union, and has the European Union responded to this, and how is it going to respond? Because otherwise it will fall apart.
The OBR, which is our own national economic forecast, has expected a 4% reduction in long-run potential productivity from leaving the EU, which is double what they predict was caused by COVID, right?
But is it all about economics?
And also, we'll see if that happens, if I may rightly intrude. I mean, come on, look at all the economic predictions that were wrong during the referendum from the Rain side.
I'm sorry, I don't necessarily accept that many of the economic predictions were wrong.
Housing prices didn't increase dramatically at that stage, and nor was there a recession, which was called by George Osborne.
We have 440 financial firms in Britain which have shifted activities since the vote in 2016, moving a combined total of $1.4 trillion in assets to the European Union, with Dublin benefiting most with 135 different relocations.
And how many have moved to the UK? I mean, we saw predictions that Unilever would leave. That never materialised. We saw predictions that Shell would leave the
Shell,
UK, and they've maintained.
The
Well, you're talking about companies here, right? It's not drastic. I mean, I'm sure companies leave. I wonder how many come back.
440.
Well, how many are moving to the UK? And Unilever.
Well,
Unilever is I believe in the top 10 biggest companies in the UK, and it stayed. So that's probably more important than 200 or so leaving. I
said 400. You just halved the number.
No, I didn't. I said that probably makes up for 200. Is what I said.
Okay.
But I don't know how many have moved, but I don't think the average person has seen any drastic impacts from some companies moving. I don't know how many have come back. I don't know the figures.
There have been many companies that have left. Josh has cited that. There have been some that have come in. It would be interesting to know actually the balance, because you mentioned Shell. There's been Coco Chanel as well that has moved from Paris. Nissan has opened more services here. So it'd be interesting to know. But there has been effects of Brexit, but both ways. Okay, we're almost finishing. So, okay, one final concluding statement. Has Brexit been a success? But keep it succinct, because I know that this could be a...
No.
Not at the moment.
But it could be, do you think?
I think that removing ourselves from a corrupt and undemocratic institution is a good thing, but it hasn't proven to be as of yet.
Look, I think short term we got lucky by leaving the European Union being great for vaccines, and long term we'll see greater flourishing.
I'm sorry, it was not great for vaccines.
You've got 30 seconds, Josh. So if you
I won't challenge you on that for show.
Okay. Well, Brexit obviously is a massive one. We've left it until now. We could probably do a whole show on Brexit. There's so much to say because it's affected. It was until COVID the biggest crisis this country's faced in terms of politics since the Second World War. When I said about the German National Bank, I do not know if that is the correct name, but it is a bank in Germany. So I just want to make sure, just in case I've got the wrong name there. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Sarah, Josh, and Daniel. I've been Felix Hawes. This has been The Big Picture. See you again next week, where Thomas Gregory will hopefully be back with us, and he sends his regards to you all. Okay, cheerio.